In terms of military unit organization, the Ukrainians and Russians are really cut from the same cloth, but things have diverged since 1991. It starts as low as the squad level. In some ways, Russian and Ukrainian squad doctrines are very different, but in others, they're shockingly similar. This video is going to compare squad structures for Ukraine's ДШВ, the Air Assault Forces, and Russia's VDV, the Airborne Forces, in the lead up to 2022. This will include their weapons and vehicles in use after Russia's original invasion. But first, if you're interested in modern conflicts, Conflict of Nations is a free online PvP strategy game where you can bring the fight to the shores of up to 128 other players in a real-time World War III. In Conflict of Nations, you're completely free to choose your strategy, whether you want to be the Hermit Kingdom or Alliance leader, and you can play on PC and mobile on the same account. I like its deep and persistent nature. Games can take weeks to complete, so it's far from superficial. Click on the link in the description to get an exclusive deal, 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. The offer is only available for 30 days, so click the link, pick your country, and carve your path to victory. The two main sources I'll be using for this comparison are Ukraine's Interim Air Assault Platoon and Squad Manual from 2019, and this Russian Airborne Forces text from 2016 posted by RussianAirborneTroops.info. Can we just acknowledge real quick how American the new Ukrainian field manual covers are? They even have a distribution statement in the same place. The camel stripped on the left, that's a cultural victory if I've ever seen one. This video is pure doctrine because I don't have first-hand accounts. I usually like to reference both, so consider this video a data point with limitations. Kind of like how flexing in the mirror under gym lighting to check how your bulk is going is a data point with limitations. But anyway, the Ukrainian air assault troops were and continue to be mounted on a variety of vehicles. Before Russia's 2014 invasion, Ukraine's air mobile battalions were largely foot mobile, focused on helicopter assaults. The exception was the 25th Airborne Brigade, mounted on BMD airborne infantry fighting vehicles, inherited from the 98th Guards Airborne Division after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But from 2014, the branch was basically entirely mechanized or motorized. In that early war period, Ukraine's VDV had 5 brigades. Around 2015, 25th Airborne Brigade had its 3 battalions mounted on BTR-3Es, BTR-4s, BMP-2s, and BMD-2s. The BTR-4 in particular, of which it had 14 of the infantry variant, were transferred out to the 92nd Mechanized Brigade in 2016 and probably replaced in large part by BMPs. The rest of the force was somewhat lighter, mounted largely on the BTR-80 or BTR-70. According to this training document referred to me by my Ukrainian Twitter mutual Eugene Pinnock, there was a doctrinal dimorphism of the 25th Airborne Brigade with its BMDs and BMPs, and the more numerous air assault brigades on BTRs. Some exceptions from around 2015 included the 79th Brigade's 88th Separate Air Mobile Battalion on trucks at the time, the 80th Brigade's 1st Battalion on Humvees, and the 95th's 13th Battalion on Kraz Spartans, which is based on the Ford F-550 funnily enough. This did change over the years. The BTR-4s left the air assault forces as mentioned previously, and new platforms like the Cossack II began to enter service. But at least 2019 squad doctrine was platform agnostic, so to speak. All these platforms were explicitly named, but only one organization was given. The Ukrainian Air Assault Squad given in the manual consisted of the squad commander. Note that one of the squad commanders would be the assistant platoon commander because there wasn't a dedicated platoon sergeant. RPG Grenadier, Assistant Grenadier, PKMS Machine Gunner, Assistant Machine Gunner, Sniper, a Medic Rifleman basically equivalent to a Combat Lifesaver, a Radio Operator, a Vehicle Gunner, and a Vehicle Driver. 10 people total, which historically was an increase from the usual 7, the limit of the BMD-2's internal passenger capacity. It's a real clown car because it's designed to be parachuted, but riding on top seems to be more in fashion around those parts than riding inside, and even the 25th Airborne Brigade only had a portion of its troops mounted on the BMD after 2014. Based on photographic evidence and training TO&Es, the AKS-74 and 545 with the folding stock was by far the most common service rifle, with some use of the 7.62 AKMS and more niche use of the Fort 221 bullpup rifles, which were licensed Israeli Tavors. In some cases, the AKs were used with accessory kits, including collapsible stocks and rails, commonly on the upper handguard over the gas tube. The MiPro M21 was a relatively common optic, Ukraine having procured 1,000 in 2014. It was the primary optic used with the Fort licensed Tavors, but 2 times as many optics were procured as rifles. To be clear, this was still a fairly small number, and completely bare AKs were way more common. By 2022, there was slightly more variety, although it was still nowhere near the optic proliferation compared to the US, France, or the UK where they're universal. The standard machine gun, meanwhile, would be the PKMS General Purpose Machine Gun, setting them apart from the mechanized troops where the RPK-74 was a common squad automatic. The standard rocket launcher was the RPG-7D, the paratrooper version that can be broken down into 2 pieces for jumping. Underbarrel grenade launchers like the GP-25 were undoubtedly available to some degree, although these sorts of charts rarely list them as individual equipment. But each company was notionally meant to have 27, more than 1 per squad. And lastly, the sniper. Originally, the squad marksman rifle would have been the Soviet vintage SVD. But after the war began, the indigenous UAR-10 based on the AR-10 and 7.62 NATO began to usurp it. In my snooping, photos of it started to become pretty common around 2020, a couple of years after the Ukrainian military officially adopted it. Depending on the situation, the squad could be divided into 2 task-organized groups. A maneuver group, sometimes called the Alpha Group, and a fire group, sometimes called a Bravo Group. The vehicle crew would be Charlie. Basically the same as modern Russian doctrine. The maneuver group would be the group moving to close with and destroy the enemy, while the fire group would provide support by fire. As a doctrinal rule, the senior rifleman, possibly the assistant RPG, would lead the maneuver group while the squad leader leads the fire group. Generally speaking, in other training documents, the machine gun and sniper are usually part of the fire group, while the RPG is part of the maneuver group. Ukrainian graphics depicting 5 dismounts, perhaps referencing the original 7-man squads on BMDs, do seem to show distinct groups with a machine gun in one and an RPG in the other. Compared to the Ukrainians, Russian airborne and air assault squads stayed a lot closer to the more Soviet-esque structure, since they inherited most of the full-on BMD-mounted airborne divisions from the Cold War. The Russian VDV squad was 6 to 7 soldiers in order to fit in the BMD Airborne IFV. As of 2021, the VDV's 4 divisions and 3 brigades had received 11 battalion sets of the newest BMD-4M. The 2 brigades to not receive it are garrisoned in the Russian Far East. The Soviet vintage BMD-2 was by far the more common vehicle. According to Oryx and War Spotting, about 2 times more BMD-2s had been visually lost compared to 4Ms. To replace losses, in 2023 it seems they started reactivating the ill-fated BMD-3, an intended BMD-2 replacement that entered service right as the Soviet Union was collapsing. Only about 137 were ever made. And like during the Soviet-Afghan War and mirroring the Ukrainians, Russian airborne troops have been getting heavier vehicles, given the BMD's significant drawbacks. One notable example is the BMP-2M. But back to the squads. 2 squads per platoon would have 7 personnel. The 7-man squad included the squad commander, who also commanded the BMD. Like the Ukrainian practice of the time, the first squad leader would be the assistant platoon commander as well. The gunner operator, who was also the deputy vehicle commander, a driver for the BMD, a senior rifleman sapper, basically a sort of dismounted deputy, a PKP machine gunner, deputy machine gunner, and a rifleman operator who could operate the BMD's anti-tank guided missile when dismounted. The last squad would be different, only 6 men to make room for the platoon commander. This squad would replace the machine gun team with an RPG-7D team, and cut out the last rifleman. Unlike the motor rifles or Ukrainian equivalents, not every squad would get an RPG. By 2022, the VDV operated a mix of AK-74Ms with side-folding stocks and AK-12s as their standard service rifles. Optics proliferation appears to have been low except during photo ops. The Russian VDV's equivalent to the URA-10 marksman rifle would be the SVD-S, the last S standing for folding stock. These rifles, chambered in 7.62x54R, were definitely in use in 2022. Doctrinally speaking, they'd be held in a battalion-level sniper platoon, similar to a battalion-level sniper squad Ukrainian air mobile battalions had. Compared to a theoretical Ukrainian airborne squad on BMDs before 2014, they were similar, but had one RPKS-74 magazine-fed light machine gun and one RPG-7D per squad. The air mobile squads, which were a larger part of the force, had a PKMS belt-fed medium machine gun instead of an RPK, maybe to make up for not having vehicle support. They also didn't lose 2 personnel to crew, so had 2 riflemen per squad and an assistant machine gunner to deal with the PKM. That the Ukrainians moved to a larger 10-man air assault squad, at least in theory, is probably due to the majority of the force becoming mechanized on more spacious BTRs. As well, factors like fitting a platoon in an Mi-8 are probably less relevant these days compared to having a combat lifesaver in every squad and more than a microscopic amount of manpower. Thanks again to Conflict of Nations for supporting Battle Order. For the next 30 days, you can get a big leg up at the link in the description with 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free, so don't miss out.